Dear Lord, remind us that love is more than appearances, and dignity is not defined by wealth or skin. Let every heart watching this story remember that pain does not define the end, but may begin the journey toward purpose. Amen. Welcome back to Mr. Comfort Stories, your home of comfort, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. And trust me, today's story, you won't want to miss a second. He married his maid, not out of love, but to shame his parents. Yes, you heard that right. A millionaire CEO, a black, full-figured housekeeper, and a contract that was never meant to end in love. But what happens when the one used as a weapon learns how to reclaim her worth? Let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who stood before a judge and vowed to protect you turned around and used you like a pawn in their personal revenge? Would you fight? Would you run? Would you forgive? Stay with me, because this story is not just about betrayal. It's about dignity. It's about redemption. It's about a woman who was never supposed to rise, but did anyway. Let me take you back to that night, the night that shattered her. Gwen stood in the hallway of their penthouse suite. The dinner dishes were still warm in the sink. Her heart, fuller than it had been in years. She'd just spent her first night feeling truly seen, but what she heard next ripped through her like a knife. "Yeah," Grant's voice echoed from his office on speakerphone. "It was all part of the plan, just needed to humiliate my parents. The marriage ends next month." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned, slipped off the ring, and walked away, leaving behind the man who mistook her worth for a joke. But that's not where the story ends. No, that's where it truly begins, because the same woman they mocked would soon have them eating out of her hand. And the baby girl they never planned for, she'd become the heartbeat of their second chance. So grab your seat, friend. This story is one of betrayal, love, slow healing, and a bold reminder. Your worth is not up for negotiation. Comment below if you've ever had to walk away from someone who didn't see your value. And if you believe every woman deserves to be loved for who she is, hit that like button now. Stay tuned, because Gwen, she didn't just survive, she started a legacy. The elevator dinged. The hallway felt colder than usual. Gwen didn't pack a single bag. She didn't need to. Her story wasn't in the things she owned, it was in the weight she carried, the grace she walked with, and the silence that screamed louder than tears. She stepped out of the penthouse in her house slippers and coat, past the doorman who gave her a confused look, past the taxi driver who raised an eyebrow, and into the night air of Manhattan, where the city buzzed but her heart stood still. She walked until her legs ached, called no one, texted no one. She just disappeared, because sometimes the most powerful goodbye is the one you don't announce. But don't feel sorry for Gwen. No. This isn't a story about pity. This is a story about power. A story about how one woman went from scrubbing marble floors in silence to commanding kitchens, contracts, and conferences with her head held high. "You're so brave," they once told her, "wearing sleeveless in public at your size." And Gwen replied, "Confidence ain't something you borrow, sugar. You either live it or you don't." This is the journey of a woman they thought they could use. A woman who was never supposed to have the last word, but built a future where every dish, every dollar, every moment was hers. So before we dive into how this all began, before we see the deal that was struck in, a quiet hallway between a tech millionaire and the woman they called the Fat Maid, I want you to do something. If you believe that no woman, no matter her size, her color, her paycheck, should ever be treated like a punchline, click that subscribe button, because the real story, it's not how she walked away. It's how she came back and made them all wish they never let her go. Gwen Harper's alarm rang every morning at 4:45 a.m., never once greeted by luxury or leisure, but by the buzzing silence of her modest Bronx apartment. The heating pipe hissed like clockwork. The fridge light flickered. But Gwen didn't complain. She had more pressing concerns than the imperfections of an old building. First came the prayer, Then came the work. She slipped into her uniform, dark slacks, white blouse, rubber-soled shoes, and tied her curls into a bun. Her fingers moved like muscle memory. As she prepared her morning tea, she FaceTimed her mother in Atlanta. "Ma, take your meds. Check your sugar. I don't want to hear no excuses." Her mother laughed. "You act like I'm one of your clients." "You're worse. Clients don't lie about their pills." In the background, Ava's face popped into the frame. "Auntie Gwen, I got all A's on my quiz." Gwen's whole face lit up. "That's my baby. Lunch money okay?" Ava hesitated. I'll send extra today," Gwen said, without missing a beat. "Now go brush them teeth. You smellin' like cafeteria chicken from here." The call ended, and Gwen exhaled. She had 2 jobs, maid at the Aldridge estate in Greenwich, and part-time cleaning gigs on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. The Aldridge mansion was a whole different planet. Italian marble floors, gold, fixtures, sculptures no one touched, and rooms that stayed empty for years. Still, Gwen scrubbed every tile like it mattered. Some of the staff looked down on her. She was the only black maid on payroll, the only one with curves they whispered about behind her back. But she kept her head high, shoulders squared. Because her mama taught her young, "We don't beg for respect, baby. We carry it." Still, life wasn't easy. Medical bills were climbing again. Her mother's insulin wasn't covered anymore. Ava's private school tuition? Late, again. Gwen had sold her car, started walking to the train. There were nights she fell asleep with her back aching and her hands numb from scrubbing. But every time she felt herself slipping into despair, she'd look at the framed photo beside her bed, her sister, smiling with Ava in her lap. That smile reminded Gwen, survival wasn't optional. It was legacy. The Aldridge estate hadn't seen its heir in over 5 years. When Grant Aldridge left for Dubai, it wasn't a vacation, it was exile. His departure came after one too many public arguments with his parents, one too many headlines they couldn't control. He'd taken a struggling piece of their investment portfolio, a failing logistics, tech company, and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar startup. He didn't just prove himself, he proved them wrong. But success hadn't healed the wound between him and his family. So when he returned to the US, it wasn't for reconciliation. It was strategy, damage control. His mother had arranged a PR dinner to announce his re-entry into East Coast society, and she'd already selected a potential wife, some Dutch heiress with a fragrance line and a fake laugh. Grant barely made it through the first glass of wine. The Aldridge name meant power. But to Grant, it also meant being paraded around like a trophy, a tool for political networking. His father, Richard Aldridge, ran Old World Wealth, like a military operation. His mother, Celeste, cared more about legacy than love. "I didn't come back for matchmaking," Grant snapped over dinner. Celeste stirred her drink. "We're not asking for a love story. We're asking for strategy. Your board wants stability." Grant leaned back. "You mean a wife who fits your profile?" "Exactly," Richard cut in. "No more drama, no more surprises. Marry someone suitable and move forward." Grant stood, napkin dropping to the floor. "I built an empire without your blueprint. Don't think for 1 second I'll let you write my future." He left before dessert was served. The next morning, he showed up at the mansion unannounced. The driver blinked. "Mr. Aldridge." "Open the gate," Grant muttered. Inside, everything was the same. The spotless staircases, the untouched chandeliers, the silence so thick it pressed against your skin. Except now, Grant walked through it not as the golden boy, but as the man they couldn't control. That afternoon, as he passed the east hallway toward the Home Office, he paused. Through the cracked door, he heard his parents speaking. Celeste's voice was icy. "That maid, she's a walking embarrassment, big, black, and bottom of the barrel. Move her out before the press arrives." Grant didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, something in him twisting. It wasn't the insult. It was the smugness in her voice, the confidence that she could say anything, do anything, and no one would ever challenge her. That moment didn't just plant an idea, it lit a fuse. And Grant? He'd never been the type to let a match burn out quietly. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh orchids. Grant hadn't planned to linger near his parents' private sitting room. But fate had a strange way of choosing its moments. He paused to adjust a cufflink when their voices bled through the slightly open door. "She dusted the piano with a dish rag," his mother said, her voice sharp with disgust. "Do you know how delicate that ivory is?" "That woman doesn't belong in a place like this," Richard added. "She's not staff. She's an eyesore. A maid is one thing." "But her?" Celeste scoffed. "She's too much of everything, too black, too fat, too loud. She doesn't belong anywhere near our name. We'll let her go quietly. She'll probably thank us for the severance." Grant didn't blink. He didn't breathe. But his hand curled slowly into a fist by his side. He knew his parents were elitist. That was no secret. But something about the way they spoke about Gwen, like she wasn't even human, gnawed at something buried in him. Not because he cared about her, not because they were close, but because Gwen had done nothing but work, early mornings, late nights, silent dignity, never asking for more than her wage, never expecting praise, and yet here they were, tearing her down as if she were trash to be swept out before the cameras showed up. Grant walked away. Not because he was angry. Anger was familiar. This was different. This was clarity. He went up to the guest wing where Gwen was mopping the hallway, earbuds in. Her hair tied up in a scarf, soft gospel music leaking out from her phone. She didn't hear him at first, but when she turned and saw him, standing there in silence, she paused. "Everything all right, Mr. Aldridge?" He studied her for a moment. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her cheeks were damp with sweat. Her shirt was damp at the collar. But she looked steady, present, real. He spoke before he could overthink it. "Marry me." The mop stopped moving. She stared. "Excuse me?" "A contract marriage, public appearances only. 6 months. I'll pay off your family's medical debt, cover your niece's tuition. You get freedom. I get leverage." Her face hardened. "You want to marry me? To embarrass them?" Grant nodded slowly. "They called you too much of everything. Let's show them exactly how much too much can look like, standing next to their precious son in front of 1,000 flashbulbs." He wasn't smiling. This wasn't flirtation. This wasn't desire. It was pure calculation. But Gwen? She wasn't one to flinch. She stared at him, chest rising, eyes unreadable, and without saying another word, she turned and walked away. The next morning, Gwen arrived at the estate prepared to resign. She'd spent the night tossing and turning, trying to make sense of what had happened. Grant's words still echoed in her head. "Marry me." What kind of man walked into someone's workday and said that like he was offering a ride? She was still angry. Still insulted, but she needed to speak her mind before walking away for good. She found him in the garden atrium, dressed in a navy turtleneck and dark slacks, sipping espresso like it was just another Tuesday. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, voice sharp but steady. "We need to talk." He looked up. "I thought we did." She didn't sit. "I don't appreciate being spoken to like an auction item. I'm not some weapon in your family feud." "I know you're not," he said. "That's why I'm asking." "You're not asking, sir. You're offering like this is business." Grant set his cup down. "It is business, but not one-sided." She folded her arms. "I know your mother's insulin isn't covered anymore," he said quietly. "I know Ava's school tuition is 3 months behind. I checked. You can hate me for it, but I wanted to understand why someone like you works this hard for so little." Gwen's chest tightened. "You shouldn't have looked into my life," she said coldly. He didn't flinch. "I know, but now that I have, I'm not just offering a deal to spite my parents. I'm offering you an out." She scoffed. "An out? What do you know about my life that needs saving?" Grant stood, hands in his pockets. "You've spent years saving other people, carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. cleaning messes that don't belong to you. I'm saying, maybe this time you let someone else carry the load." His voice dropped lower. "I won't touch you. I won't control you. I don't want love. I just want headlines that make my parents sweat. In exchange, your mother's prescriptions, Ava's tuition, your freedom from this job, all handled." Gwen blinked. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. This wasn't a man begging. This was a man who had never had to. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded contract. Neat, legal, precise. 6 months. Appearances only. Full exit clause. All assets remain yours. She didn't take the paper. Instead, she whispered, "You think because I clean your floors, I'll sell my dignity?" Grant met her eyes. "I think you've already sold too much of your time to survive. I'm offering something different." Gwen turned and walked out of the atrium without a word. Again. But that night, as she sat on FaceTime with her mother in Atlanta, Ava cried in the background about being kicked off the school meal plan. "Baby," her mama said, voice gentle but tired, "sometimes God hides blessings behind strange doors." Gwen stared at the contract spread out on her kitchen table. The words blurred, not because she didn't understand them, but because every line felt like a mirror reflecting back her pride, her exhaustion, her fear. Her mother was still on FaceTime, silent now. The light from the phone screen softened the wrinkles in her face, but not the weight in her voice. "Talk to me, baby." Gwen rubbed her forehead. "He wants me to marry him, Ma. 6 months. No strings. Just pretend." Her mother didn't flinch, not like Gwen expected. "Did he disrespect you?" "No." "Did he promise something he can't deliver?" "No." "Did he say you got to sleep with him?" Gwen hesitated. He said no. Just public appearances, fancy parties, family events, a front. Her mama leaned closer to the screen, eyes clear despite her weariness. "Then why are you crying, Gwen?" She didn't even realize she was. Tears were sliding silently down her cheeks, falling onto the cold marble beneath her elbows. "Because I know what this is. I know I'm the joke. I know his parents will hate it. I know the media will mock me. I know people will look at me and say, 'What's she doing with him?'" She paused. "I'm tired, Ma. I don't want to be someone's protest. I want to be wanted." Her mother nodded slowly, then spoke the words Gwen hadn't expected. "Sometimes, baby, the good Lord sends blessings through ugly packages." Gwen looked up. "This ain't about pride," her mother continued. "It's about purpose. That man may think he's using you, but you know who you are. You carry yourself with dignity, whether you're in a maid's uniform or a white dress. If he wants to show you off just to make his mama mad, let him. Walk into that chaos like a woman on a mission." She coughed lightly, then smiled. "Let them stare, let them whisper, but you stand tall, not because of the contract, not because of the money, but because you know who you are. And because Ava needs to see what strength looks like in heels." Gwen exhaled long and hard. The next morning, she arrived at the Aldridge estate in jeans and a plain tee. No apron, no uniform. She knocked once on Grant's office door. He looked up from his laptop, surprised to see her. She placed the signed contract on his desk without a word. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. 6 months, she said. "That's all you get." Grant nodded. "Understood. And I want my own room, my own key, my own name kept clean." He stood. "Done. And one more thing." She turned back, staring him down with the full force of a woman who had fought too long to be invisible. "If you try to humiliate me in public, just know I don't embarrass easy." Grant didn't smile. But the man who once looked at her like a pawn now looked at her like a storm he might not be ready for. The wedding took just under 11 minutes. There was no organ, no aisle, no doves. Just a courthouse in downtown Manhattan, a judge with an afternoon cough, and 2 people who barely made eye contact. Gwen wore a sleek ivory pantsuit she had purchased with the first advance from the contract. Her natural curls framed her face, soft but bold. No veil, no bouquet. just the weight of a decision she never imagined making. Grant showed up in a charcoal suit and black turtleneck. No boutonniere, no expression. The officiant stumbled over their names, and when she asked if either party had objections, Gwen thought of 1,000 reasons to say yes. But instead, she nodded once. So did he. The rings were plain. The kiss was skipped. And yet, by noon, their images were trending online. CEO weds plus-sized maid, PR stunt or scandal. Mystery bride stuns in no-frills ceremony. Tech king marries the help, backlash or brilliance. No one knew the full story. But everyone had something to say. Gwen kept her phone off. There were no bridesmaids, no cake, no celebration. Just a silent black car waiting outside to take them from the courthouse to his Manhattan penthouse. The ride was wordless. She watched the skyline blur through the tinted window, legs crossed, hands folded. He sat on the opposite end of the back seat, scrolling through emails like nothing life-changing had just occurred. As the elevator rose, Gwen swallowed the tightness in her throat. She wasn't here for romance. She wasn't here for rescue. She was here to survive. And if marriage was the ticket, then she'd play the role until the curtains dropped. But as the doors opened to the top-floor penthouse and the marble floors greeted her with polished perfection, Gwen couldn't help but feel the air shift. This was no longer a job. This was a stage. And everyone, especially the ones who doubted her, were about to get the performance of a lifetime. The penthouse had 42 windows, 3 fireplaces, and a private rooftop garden. But none of it made Gwen feel at home. Her suite was tucked in the west wing of the space, technically elegant but emotionally barren. White walls, grey bedding, a view of the skyline that looked better in photos than it felt at night. She unpacked her things slowly the first day. A few blouses, 2 pairs of flats, a framed photo of Ava and her mama, a small Bible she kept by her bedside. No welcome basket, no note. Just silence. Grant had left a neatly printed house manual on the dresser. Your suite is yours. You have full access to the gym, kitchen, and library. The primary bedroom remains private. Public appearances will be scheduled. Your calendar will be updated weekly. Questions can be sent via text. He hadn't even signed his name. Gwen stared at the page, then folded it in half. Her mornings no longer began with FaceTime calls or early train rides. She didn't need to mop floors or polish mirrors. Now she had assistants, a personal stylist, a PR rep who texted tips like, "Soft colors photograph better next to Grant. Please avoid chewing gum in public. Don't correct the press when they say you met at a gala." Simpler narrative. Narrative. That's what she'd become. A headline with legs. Meals arrived in quiet delivery bags. Her name was suddenly whispered in online forums. Her face popped up in gossip blogs with captions like "bold choice" or "unlikely pair." She overheard 2 house staff whispering one morning near the laundry chute, "She's just a stand-in. It'll be over in a few months." Gwen didn't flinch. She folded her towels and walked away. At night, she sat by the large window in her suite, watching the lights flicker across Manhattan. Some nights she read, some nights she prayed, but most nights she just sat, because even though she lived in a home that touched the clouds, she'd never felt closer to the ground, and every echo of her footsteps through the empty halls reminded her she was in a palace built for someone else's story. The first public appearance came just 2 weeks after the wedding. A charity auction in Soho, art, wine, suits worth more than Gwen's entire student debt. The kind of place where wealth wasn't discussed. It was implied by the way you held your glass or nodded without smiling. Gwen arrived in a fitted emerald gown that hugged her curves unapologetically. Her stylist had tried to push something looser, but Gwen insisted. "If I'm gonna be seen," she said, "they're gonna see all of me." Grant met her by the entrance, looking immaculate in a midnight blue tux. He barely acknowledged her, but when the cameras began flashing, his hand slid to the small of her back like they'd been in love for years. He leaned in close, voice low. "Smile." Gwen tilted her chin and gave the lens what it wanted. Not a grin, but something softer, stronger, unbothered. Inside, the whispers began before they even reached the coat check. She was his maid, right? I didn't know the Aldridge family was into social experiments. She's brave. A champagne blonde in pearls leaned close as Gwen passed and whispered, just loud enough to be heard. You're so bold, darling. I wouldn't show my arms at that size. Gwen turned slowly, smiled sweetly, and replied, That's all right, sugar. Confidence ain't something you can borrow. The woman blinked. Grant smirked. As the evening wore on, Gwen played the part flawlessly. She clinked glasses. She nodded politely. She endured backhanded compliments and cutting glances like a woman raised by steel and scripture. At one point, Grant leaned in and whispered, You're doing well. Gwen didn't look at him. I'm not doing this for you, she said quietly. I'm doing it for Ava. He straightened. Later that week, headlines praised her look. Fashion blogs called her unapologetically elegant. A clip of her arm clapback went viral. The internet dubbed her the realest wife in Manhattan. But Gwen didn't care about going viral. She wasn't here for applause. She was here to remind the world and herself that no contract could define her dignity. She wasn't performing for them. She was surviving with grace. By their fourth public event, Gwen no longer walked one step behind Grant. She walked beside him. What began as stiff photo ops and cold glances had shifted. Gwen's posture changed. Her eyes no longer scanned for judgment. They scanned for opportunity. At a women's philanthropy gala in Midtown, she wore a one-shoulder navy dress, with gold hoops and a natural afro puff that reached for the ceiling. She walked in like she paid for the venue herself. At first, people still stared, but this time, Gwen stared back. She moved with grace, but also with presence, the kind of presence you couldn't fake and certainly couldn't ignore. While Grant networked with CEOs, Gwen was approached by women, some curious, some kind, others cloaked in passive condescension. It must be hard, keeping up with all this, one woman offered, glancing at Gwen's designer clutch. Oh, I'm not keeping up, Gwen replied calmly. I'm setting my own pace. Another woman asked, So what did you do before you two met? Gwen smiled. I made homes beautiful. Still do. The whispers hadn't stopped, but Gwen had learned to stop absorbing them. Instead, she flipped the script. By mid-event, she found herself at the center of a table conversation with other black women. Stylists, lawyers, non-profit directors, women who saw her, not as a project but as proof. You're showing these folks something they never saw coming, one of them whispered. I didn't come here to be an example, Gwen replied, but I won't waste the chance if I've got it. Back at the penthouse, even the staff had noticed the shift. Mrs. Aldridge, the doorman, greeted one morning, tipping his hat, not with obligation but respect. She nodded back, still not used to the title. In the evenings, she received speaking invitations from women's groups, boutique panels, and body image initiatives. She turned most of them down, still cautious of media traps, but she accepted one, a women's leadership brunch in Harlem. She wore a soft pink suit and heels that hurt like sin. But she didn't complain. I'm not a speaker, she told the crowd. But I am a woman who knows what it means to feel out of place in your own skin, and still show up anyway. The room rose to its feet. Gwen had entered this world as a contract. Now, she was becoming a symbol, not because she asked for it, but because she had earned every damn moment. Grant had expected obedience, maybe even a little chaos, but he had not expected applause. At first, it was subtle. The way the board members started greeting Gwen first at events, the way journalists asked for her quote, not his, the way donors' wives took selfies with her like she was the main attraction. One afternoon, at a press event for a new tech expansion, a reporter ignored Grant's entire rollout speech and turned to Gwen with a question. How does it feel to walk into rooms that were never built for you and take up space anyway? Gwen looked at Grant before answering. It feels like I was always meant to be here. They just forgot to put my name on the invite. The room chuckled. The moment went viral. Again, By the end of the week, her Instagram had gained 60,000 new followers. One evening, as they prepared for a gala, Grant stood by the full-length mirror, adjusting his cufflinks when he noticed Gwen's reflection behind him. She wore a floor-length satin gown in deep plum. Her shoulders were bare. Her confidence wasn't. He cleared his throat. "You clean up well." She tilted her head. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" He didn't respond. They walked into the gala side by side, but for the first time, Grant was the one riding her wave. At one table, a senior investor's wife leaned toward him and whispered, "Your wife is breathtaking, so grounded. You're lucky." He looked across the room at Gwen, laughing, holding court with two women from a philanthropic startup. Something twisted in his chest. This wasn't going how he planned. She wasn't being mocked. She was being celebrated. Every article, every social post, every whispered compliment began reshaping the narrative. Gwen was no longer the symbol of his rebellion. She was becoming the brand's unexpected strength. His parents were livid. His mother had called twice that week, voice sharp like glass. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to our name?" He had paused. "Yeah," he said. Fixing it. But what he couldn't say out loud, what he barely admitted to himself, was that something had shifted. This woman he had picked for convenience was becoming impossible to ignore. And the more the world fell for her, the more he did too. The lights went out at 8:43 p.m. Gwen had just finished pouring a glass of ginger ale when the penthouse hummed, stuttered, and fell silent. No air conditioning, no television, no glowing city outside the window. Just the quiet hush of power vanishing. She looked around and chuckled to herself. Of course this place doesn't have a backup generator. Most things in the building ran on luxury, not logic. She rummaged through her dresser, found a pack of scented candles her mother had mailed months ago, and lit 3. The hallway glowed faintly. Lavender and vanilla filled the air. Then she reached into her carry-on and pulled out an old spiral notebook. A gumbo recipe. Her mother's handwriting, faded from years of use. The kitchen gas line still worked. So, she cooked. Not for a party, not for a camera, just because it felt like home. She diced onions and celery, chopped smoked sausage, stirred the roux, slowly, carefully, until the scent filled the penthouse like memory. Halfway through, she heard footsteps. Grant appeared in the doorway, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled from whatever board meeting he'd stormed out of earlier. He blinked. "What's going on?" "Power's out. You lit candles?" "I wasn't planning to bump into walls." He glanced around. "Smells incredible." She raised a brow. "Surprised the fat maid can cook?" Grant's face tightened for a second. But not from offense. From shame. "No," he said softly. "I'm surprised I forgot what warmth feels like." The words hung in the air. Gwen didn't respond. She turned back to the stove. A few minutes later, she handed him a bowl. Plastic, the kind from the discount store. She didn't offer a spoon, just a paper napkin and a look. He sat beside her on the kitchen floor, backs pressed against the cabinets, legs stretched out. They ate in silence for a while. Then he laughed, genuine and short. "This reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen. She used to sneak food into the study so I wouldn't have to sit through dinner parties." Gwen sipped from her bowl. "She sounds like the only one in your family with sense." She was. They hated her for it. For a moment, they weren't a scandal or a story. Just two people, in candlelight, trading small truths between bites of gumbo. They finished the gumbo, but neither moved. Grant leaned his head back against the cabinet, eyes closed. The scent of candle wax mixed with smoked paprika lingered between them. Gwen sat quietly beside him, her bowl now empty, resting in her lap. The silence was comfortable, for once. Until Grant spoke again. "You ever think about what your life would have been if one thing went differently?" Gwen glanced over. "What do you mean?" "I mean, one decision, one phone call, one yes instead of no." She nodded slowly. "All the time." "Me too." He exhaled. "I used to think I had control. over everything, who I became, what I built. But tonight, sitting here like this, eating gumbo on the kitchen floor with a woman my mother would rather erase from every family portrait. He paused. I'm surprised I forgot what warmth feels like. Gwen didn't move. Not at first, but her eyes shifted to him, soft, curious. You say things like that, she whispered, then go right back to being cold the next day. He didn't deny it. Because warmth feels dangerous, he said. That landed heavier than she expected. He looked at her then, really looked. There was no lace on her, no spotlight, just Gwen, bare shoulders, bare soul. When you're used to living behind walls, she said, windows can feel like threats. He gave her a sideways smile. It wasn't charming, it was tired. You always talk like you've already survived the storm. She smirked. Maybe I have. Grant reached out and gently took the bowl from her hands, set it down on the floor. Their hands brushed, brief but charged. Neither moved. The wind outside howled slightly through the glass, but neither heard it. Their world had shrunk to that floor, that moment, that breath. You know, Gwen said slowly, for someone who's supposed to be in control, you look like you've been lost for a while. He didn't argue. Because it was true, and for once, being seen didn't feel like judgment. It felt like relief. He leaned a little closer, not enough to touch her, but enough to say without words, I'm listening now. And she didn't lean away. The Montauk retreat was supposed to be a quiet weekend for tech investors and executives, private oceanfront cabins, networking over clambakes, and discreet deals signed on yachts. But this year, the buzz wasn't about business. It was about Grant Aldridge's wife. Gwen arrived in a white linen dress that draped over her curves like it had been designed for her alone. Her hair was styled in a soft twist-out that kissed her shoulders. No diamonds, no excessive makeup, just confidence. As she stepped onto the dock beside Grant, all conversations shifted, not with applause, but with a silence more telling. She felt it. Eyes, whispers. But she walked like she owned the tide. Grant, beside her, was quiet. He hadn't said much since the blackout dinner, but he hadn't distanced himself either. At dinner, seated between executives and heiresses, Gwen held her own. She joked with a CFO from Atlanta about Southern food. She discussed digital education funding with a venture capitalist who kept staring, wide-eyed, at how comfortably she spoke. Someone whispered near the bar, "She's not what I expected." Gwen didn't flinch. She sipped her lemonade. Later that evening, Grant found her standing barefoot at the edge of the dock, heels in hand, watching the moon paint silver streaks across the ocean. "You're quiet," he said, stepping beside her. She didn't look at him. "I don't want to perform tonight." He nodded. "You don't have to." She turned finally, eyes hard. "I'm tired of pretending to be invisible. I know I'm not some trophy, but I deserve more than being your scandal." He blinked, caught off guard. "You're not a scandal," he murmured. "Then, what am I?" The question lingered. He didn't answer, because the truth was complicated, rooted in motives he no longer respected in himself. She turned to walk away, but he reached out, gently catching her wrist. "Gwen." She paused. Their eyes met under the glow of soft dock lights and distant music. It wasn't a setup this time. It wasn't staged. It wasn't for the cameras. What happened next came from something neither of them had expected. Need. Real, raw, unspoken need. Gwen's breath caught the moment Grant said her name. Not because it was the first time he'd spoken it, but because of how he said it. Not with authority, not with indifference, but with hesitation, like her name had suddenly become a prayer he didn't know he was allowed to whisper. She turned back slowly. "What, Grant?" He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes searched hers, no longer looking through her, but at her, like he'd only just realized the woman he thought he'd hired had her own gravity. He stepped closer. One hand still held her wrist, barely touching. The other reached for her cheek, slow, gentle, deliberate. She didn't move, didn't flinch. His thumb brushed the curve of her face. Her skin, warm from the breeze, held steady under his palm. "I should have said this sooner," he murmured. "But I see you." And then he kissed her. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't forceful. It was a kiss layered in apology, confusion, longing. Gwen stiffened at first. Her hand pressed lightly to his chest, an instinct to stop. But she didn't push. Not this time. Because this wasn't the same man who tossed her a contract like a favor. This wasn't the cold strategist in cufflinks. This was a man letting go, just for a second. Their lips moved slowly, like they were rediscovering something ancient, like the quiet hunger had been hiding beneath every staged photo, every whispered fake compliment, every stolen glance. When he pulled back, she didn't speak. Neither did he. He just rested his forehead against hers. Eyes closed. His hands slid down to her waist, reverent. Like her body wasn't something to be disguised, but something sacred. They went back to the cabin together. No words, just heavy breaths between touches. Inside, he peeled her linen dress off with care, not hunger. She slid his shirt off, hands trembling, heart louder than the ocean outside. They fell into bed, the sheets cool against warm skin. He kissed every inch of her shoulders, her arms, the soft stretch of her belly. "You're beautiful," he whispered, like he meant it for the first time. Gwen didn't need flowers. She didn't need music. She needed this, the slow rise and fall of his chest against hers, the quiet gasp as her hands found his back, the warmth of being held, not hidden. They made love slowly, not to impress, not to perform, but to feel. The lights stayed low. The windows steamed, and somewhere in the rhythm of skin on skin, Gwen stopped guarding her heart, just for a moment. She didn't cry out. She cried, softly, quietly. Grant noticed, kissed her tears without question. "I've never felt seen," she whispered. He pulled her closer. "I never knew what it meant, until now." Sunlight spilled across the cabin floor like it was trying to uncover something sacred. The bed was quiet. The only movement was the slow rise and fall of Gwen's back, her breathing soft, peaceful, steady. Her head rested on one arm. Her other hand still lingered near the space where Grant had been. But that space was empty now. He stood near the window, shirtless, staring out at the sea. His jaw was tight, his thoughts louder than the waves. Last night had happened. Every kiss, every sigh, every moment of closeness. It wasn't a dream. And that's what terrified him. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to mean anything. She was supposed to be a name on a contract, a symbol of rebellion, a calculated move in a lifelong chess game with his parents. But the woman in that bed, she had wrecked every rule he ever wrote. Grant pulled on his shirt, moving slowly, as if trying not to wake the truth that now lived in that room. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He stepped out onto the deck, letting the cold air hit him in the chest, hoping it would numb the panic rising behind his ribs. Inside, Gwen stirred. She sat up slowly, her body sore in the best way, the sheets still warm from the night before. For a moment, she smiled, but when she reached out and found the bed empty, her chest tightened. She wrapped the sheet around her and walked to the deck door. He was out there, arms folded, posture stiff, avoiding eye contact. "You left the bed," she said. He didn't answer. "Last night wasn't a mistake," she added. Still nothing. She stepped closer. "Grant." He finally turned. His face was blank, cold again. "We got carried away, that's all." The words slapped harder than silence. Gwen blinked. "Carried away." He nodded. "It doesn't change anything. So we go back to pretending. That's what we agreed to." Her eyes searched his face. Not for softness. She already knew it was gone. She nodded once. Slow. Controlled. "You're a coward," she said quietly. Grant's jaw tensed. "This isn't about fear." "Yes, it is. You're scared to feel anything real. Scared to lose control. So you'd rather hurt me than admit this meant something." He looked away. And that was all she needed. Gwen stepped back inside, her dignity still wrapped around her like armor. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply got dressed, packed her things, and left the retreat without a word. Because if he couldn't hold her in the daylight, he didn't deserve her in the dark. 3 days passed in silence. No texts, no dinners, no polite small talk. Grant buried himself in work. Gwen returned to the guest suite like a shadow. Not because she was weak, but because she was waiting to see if he'd reach for her. He never did. On the 4th evening, Gwen returned from a short women's brunch and went upstairs to change. She didn't mean to listen, but his voice was already echoing down the hallway, sharp, impatient, clipped. He was on a call in the study. The door was half open. "I told you, it's temporary," he said, pacing. "The marriage ends next month." Gwen froze. Yes, she's still here. For appearances. It was all part of the plan. Make my parents squirm. That's all this ever was. Her heart didn't race. It sank. Dropped like a weight to the bottom of her stomach. No, she doesn't know. She probably thinks I caught feelings or some nonsense. Trust me, it's handled. Gwen backed away slowly. Her feet were numb. Her throat thick. So it was a lie. Even after that night. Even after he'd kissed her, like she mattered. Even after he'd whispered that she was beautiful. Even while his hands memorized the curve of her back. It wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. She didn't wait to hear the rest. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She walked back to her suite, packed her bags, and placed the wedding ring on the nightstand. Then she pulled her curls into a bun, zipped her coat, and called a car. The driver blinked when he saw her come out alone. "Airport?" he asked. "No," Gwen said quietly. "Just home." The city lights blurred outside the window as the penthouse disappeared behind her. This wasn't escape. This was deliverance. Because when someone tells you who they are, you stop rewriting them in your mind. And when a man shows you your love was a weapon in his war, you drop it and walk away. Gwen didn't leave a note. She didn't slam a door. She didn't throw anything or yell. Because some heartbreaks are too deep for theatrics. She simply gathered what was hers, which honestly wasn't much. A small suitcase. The Bible her mother gave her. Her passport. And her dignity. She left the designer dresses hanging in the closet. The luxury shoes she never asked for. The gold chain Grant had placed on her nightstand weeks ago. Still in the velvet box. She didn't want souvenirs from a lie. She moved quietly, calmly. The staff didn't stop her. The doorman offered to help carry her bag, but she declined. "I've carried heavier," she said softly. She stepped into the back of the Uber, eyes forward. No tears, not yet. Her phone buzzed as they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. A text from Grant. "Event tomorrow. Black dress preferred." She stared at it for a moment, then pressed delete. He hadn't even noticed she was gone. Or maybe he had. Maybe he was testing her, trying to see if she'd play along like nothing happened. But Gwen Harper didn't play games. Not anymore. By the time the car rolled past the last streetlight into Queens, the weight in her chest shifted, from pain to clarity. She wasn't angry. She was done. She arrived at LaGuardia, booked a one-way ticket with the last of her personal savings, and boarded the next flight to Atlanta. She didn't text her mother in advance. Didn't post anything on social media. Didn't call Ava. She just flew. At 1:17 a.m., Gwen stepped out into the Georgia humidity, dragging her little bag across cracked pavement. The night air hugged her, not with comfort, but with something more honest, freedom. When her Lyft driver pulled into the small cul-de-sac where her mama lived, Gwen paused at the gate, looking at the chipped white mailbox and the porch light flickering like a heartbeat. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't broken, but because she didn't want to waste one more tear on a man who had planned her heartbreak like it was strategy. She knocked softly. The door opened faster than she expected. Her mama stood there in a headscarf and robe, eyes widening. No words. She just pulled Gwen into her arms, tight and warm, like nothing else mattered. "You home," she whispered. "That's all I need to know." And Gwen finally let herself fall apart. Not loud, not dramatic, just one breath. And then another. Atlanta wasn't quiet. It buzzed with cicadas, porch talk, and gospel humming through open windows. But after the cold silence of New York, it felt like a lullaby Gwen had forgotten how to sing. Her mother didn't ask questions the first morning. She just cooked grits with cheese, fried catfish, and slid a glass of sweet tea across the table like it was medicine. Eat, then talk. That was the rule. So Gwen ate. 3 days passed before she unpacked her suitcase. She moved back into her old room, smaller than she remembered, walls still lined with old school photos and a squeaky floorboard near the closet she used to cover with a rug. It wasn't a penthouse, but it felt whole. Ava ran into her arms the moment she got home from school. "I saw you on TikTok. You look so pretty in that purple dress. Are you famous now?" Gwen laughed, genuinely for the first time in weeks. "No, baby. I'm just your auntie." Ava didn't need fame. She needed presence. And Gwen was finally present again. She spent the next week helping around the house, grocery runs, cleaning out old cabinets, cooking with her mama like they used to. Her phone kept buzzing, calls from Grant's team, emails from PR reps even. One message from an old college classmate who'd seen her in a headline. She ignored them all. Because for the first time in years, Gwen was choosing herself. She went with her mama to church that Sunday. The choir still sang off-key, and the pews still creaked when you shifted too hard. But when the pastor spoke about God using broken things to build better futures, Gwen felt every word. She wasn't broken. She was being rebuilt. One night, as she stood on the back porch watching fireflies flicker across the lawn, her mama joined her. "You ain't gotta tell me everything," she said. "But I know you didn't come back here because things went well." Gwen nodded slowly. "He used me, Ma. Even after everything," her mother sighed, wrapping her arm around Gwen's shoulder. "That man may have broke your heart, but he didn't break you. And long as you remember that, he don't win." They stood there for a while, just listening to the night. And in that stillness, Gwen began to feel something stir inside her. Not revenge, not regret, but resurrection. It started with a pot of oxtail stew. Gwen had made it for a neighbor who'd just come home from the hospital. Word spread faster than the scent. 2 days later, someone called asking if she could make Sunday dinner for a small baby shower. No cameras, no headlines, just food. She said yes. And something unlocked, not because it paid much, not at first, but because for the first time in a long while, what she created filled bellies and souls, not tabloids. She borrowed her cousin's kitchen for larger orders, used her niece's iPhone to shoot little videos, short clips of her chopping collard greens while humming old gospel songs, sharing her mama's biscuit recipe with a wink and a wooden spoon. She called the page Big Love Kitchen. The name wasn't clever, it was accurate, because everything she cooked came from a place that had once been broken, then rebuilt, stronger, deeper, softer. And the internet noticed. People didn't just like the food. They felt it. "This tastes like my grandmother's porch. You made me remember where I came from. I haven't seen someone bless their food on camera in years." Her following jumped overnight. 50 followers turned into 10,000 in a week. A local podcast featured her. An HBCU food blog called her Atlanta's healing chef. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't chasing attention. She was simply being herself, and for the first time, the world was clapping for the real her. She turned the guest room into a prep space, turned the front porch into a pickup station. And when her mama's old friend from church handed her an envelope filled with church fundraiser money to help buy a used stove, Gwen cried in the driveway. "I didn't ask for this. We know," the woman said, "but you gave us something when we didn't ask either." She registered the business under the name Big Love Kitchen LLC, printed flyers, set up a booking email, paid her cousin's son $100 to design a logo. She wasn't just feeding people now. She was feeding herself. Hope, healing, confidence. Not even Grant Aldridge's money could buy what she was building with her bare hands. And the more she poured into it, the more Gwen realized She hadn't lost anything. She had been redirected. It wasn't luck. It was consistency. Gwen woke up at 5:30 every morning, apron tied, gospel in the background, phone set on a $9 tripod from Walmart. She recorded every stir of her gumbo, every glaze brushed on peach cobbler, every sprinkle of cayenne across the fried catfish. No filters, no rehearsed lines, just food and heart. One morning, Ava burst into the kitchen holding her iPad. "Auntie, you hit 200,000 followers." Gwen blinked. "Say what now?" Ava grinned. "Someone famous reshared your mac and cheese video. The comments are blowing up." Sure enough, her phone was buzzing non-stop. "Do you ship to New Orleans? Please open a location in Chicago. I don't even eat meat, but I'd fight somebody for your fried chicken." What started as side orders became a wait list. What started as community support caught the attention of people with capital. A local investor reached out, a black woman named Tanisha who'd grown up 2 blocks from Gwen's high school and now owned 3 boutique restaurants in Atlanta. They met at a cafe. Gwen still in her apron, flower on her sleeve. Tanisha shook her hand firmly. "You're not just selling food," she said. "You're selling dignity, soul, identity. That's powerful." Gwen tilted her head. "Why me?" "Because you're already building what money can't. I'm just here to scale it." With Tanisha's backing, Gwen leased a small storefront downtown. It wasn't flashy, but the windows were wide. The counter was low enough for Ava to see over. The walls were painted soft yellow like her mama's kitchen back home. And on the glass door, in bold script, the name read, "Big Love Kitchen, Real Food, Real People, Real Stories." Opening day was a Friday. The line stretched down the sidewalk. People came for the food, but stayed for something else. Her story, her strength, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, love really could live in the form of sweet potato pie and cornbread. She didn't look at Grant's texts anymore. She didn't need to, because for the first time in her adult life, Gwen wasn't just surviving, she was winning. And not by playing someone else's game, but by cooking in her own kitchen, on her own terms, with the biggest love of all, self-worth. The headlines came fast, like a string of falling dominoes. Aldridge Tech CFO resigns amid SEC probe. Anonymous whistleblower leaks internal emails. Alleging financial misconduct. Stock plummets 28% in 48 hours. Grant had built the company on code, capital, and charisma. But what he didn't see coming was the rot within his own boardroom. His trusted CFO had been moving funds under dummy shell companies. For 2 years, hidden under the same quarterly reports Grant barely skimmed because he trusted too much and listened too little. The press was merciless. His inbox filled with legal alerts. Investors demanded explanations. Shareholders wanted heads to roll. And then came the phone call that would snap the last thread. "You'll need to step down from the board for optics," his father said. "Excuse me?" Grant snapped, pacing in his office. "This scandal will touch all of us unless you distance yourself. We'll issue a statement, temporary leave for mental clarity." "You mean sacrifice me to save the family brand?" There was a pause. "That's exactly what you did when you married that woman." Grant's grip tightened around his phone. "Her name is Gwen, and she didn't destroy this company. Your greed did." "I won't argue with someone who threw away our legacy for attention," his father replied coldly. "You're out." Click. Just like that, he wasn't the face of Aldridge Tech anymore. By the end of the week, his name had been wiped from the website. His corner office emptied. His family's public relations firm unfollowed him on social media. Even his mother went silent. No dinners, no check-ins, no denial, only distance. For years, Grant had ruled in suits and silence. Power had been his shield. Prestige had been his oxygen. Now, both were gone. He sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by leather and steel, scrolling through news articles that dissected his failure like a public autopsy. The company was in chaos, and for once, he had no one to blame. Because while he played God in a marble tower, The one woman who had warned him about the danger of pride had walked away, and she was thriving. The penthouse hadn't changed, but Grant had. The glass walls still framed the skyline. The imported rugs still hugged the marble floors. The wine fridge still hummed in the background, but none of it meant anything now, because Gwen was gone, and everywhere he turned, she lingered, not in the furniture, but in the absence of her. Her laugh no longer echoed from the hallway. The guest suite door stayed closed, locked like a chapter he could no longer read. Even the faint scent of lavender that used to trail behind her was gone, and yet he still expected her. Every morning he half-turned when the elevator chimed. Every evening he caught himself looking toward the kitchen, waiting for a voice that had stopped speaking to him. He'd replayed that phone call 100 times. It was all part of the plan. He hadn't meant it. Not really. But that didn't matter, because Gwen had heard it. And for someone who had already been used by life too many times, that was enough. Now, Grant sat in the very same office where he once signed that cruel contract. Only now, the silence was louder. He opened his laptop, searched her name. There she was, standing in front of a small yellow storefront, holding a tray of peach cobbler, smiling like peace itself. Big Love Kitchen, Atlanta's soul-fed star. She was glowing, not the glow of fame or wealth, but the glow of freedom. He clicked through the videos on her page. She was laughing with kids in aprons, wiping flour on her jeans, hugging her mama during a taste test. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was home. He rested his forehead in his hands, not from shame alone, but from grief. Because for the first time in his adult life, he realized something no business school had taught him. Success without substance is just noise. And Gwen? She had been the only melody worth listening to. The next morning, he stood by the bedroom window, staring out at the skyline with a bag packed by his feet. A flight was booked. One way. Destination, Atlanta. Not to chase a fantasy, but to find his footing again. And maybe, if she let him, start from the ground up. The flight to Atlanta wasn't full, but Grant sat by the window, head down, hands clasped like a man carrying something heavier than a suitcase. He wore no designer label. No watch, no ego, just jeans, a grey hoodie, and the quiet weight of knowing he had finally run out of excuses. The man who once closed billion-dollar deals from private jets was now flying economy, holding a box of Gwen's favorite cornbread mix in his lap like an offering. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted a chance to show up in silence and stay until his actions said what words never could. When the plane landed, he took a cab straight to the south side. No driver, no assistance, just him and a note he scribbled on the back of a hotel receipt. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for work. It was barely past noon when the cab pulled up in front of the shop. Big Love Kitchen. It looked even smaller in person. The yellow paint was fresh but modest. A group of kids laughed as they walked past with paper-to-go boxes. Grant stepped out of the car slowly, unsure if his legs would carry him inside. The glass door opened before he reached it. It wasn't Gwen. It was an older woman, mid-60s, head wrapped in a bright scarf, arms folded. Her eyes narrowed the second she saw him. I know who you are, she said flatly. Grant nodded. Is Gwen here? She don't need closure, son. I'm not here to talk. He handed her the folded note. She opened it, read it once, looked him up and down again. Then, to his surprise, she stepped aside. Aprons on the hook, mops by the back fridge. And don't you touch that stove unless someone tells you to. Grant blinked. You're letting me in? You're not in yet. You're on trial. Let's see if your hands can work as hard as your mouth did when you lied. She turned and walked off. Grant stepped inside quietly, breathing in the scent of warm butter and stewed greens. No cameras, no board meetings, no headlines, just flour-dusted counters, and the chance to finally do something that didn't benefit him. He tied the apron around his waist, rolled up his sleeves, and picked up the mop. Day one of redemption had begun. Grant didn't speak much that first day. He swept, he mopped, he burned the rice. Twice, he peeled potatoes too thick, confused paprika for chili powder. At one point, he knocked over a tray of biscuit dough and nearly slipped trying to clean it up. Everyone in the kitchen watched, some with amusement, most with disbelief, because this wasn't just some man. This was that man, the one from the headlines, the one who used a woman's life like a billboard for revenge. Now he stood behind the sink, scrubbing pots with his sleeves rolled up and dish soap on his collar. No gold watch, no tailored suit, just dishwater hands and silent regret. Gwen wasn't there that day. She was at a school fundraiser, serving mini peach pies to raise money for classroom computers. When she returned late that afternoon, her mama met her at the back door. "He came," she said simply. Gwen paused, sliding off her earrings. "Did he cause a scene?" "No, baby. He just cleaned one." Gwen said nothing, just looked away. Her heart didn't leap. It didn't melt, but it did pause. By day 3, Grant had learned how to cut onions without crying, how to stack to-go boxes without overfilling them, and how to greet customers with ma'am and sir like he was raised on manners instead of mergers. He took out the trash, cleaned the grease trap, washed the floor with a toothbrush when he saw it wasn't coming clean with the mop. "You missed a spot," Gwen's cousin teased one morning, tossing him a rag. Grant nodded and got down on his knees. "I'll fix it." No argument, no pride, just action. He didn't ask to speak to Gwen. He didn't send flowers, didn't write letters. He just showed up, 6 a.m., sharp, every day. He brought donuts for the crew. He paid out of pocket when a supplier raised prices. He filled in for a delivery driver who overslept. And when a little boy spilled juice on the counter during pickup, Grant knelt down and said, "It's all right, buddy. Happens to the best of us." The boy smiled. The staff noticed. So did Gwen. She watched from the back office, silent, unmoved on the outside. But something inside her shifted, not because she trusted him again, but because she saw something she never expected from Grant Aldridge: service. Real, quiet, humble service. Grant didn't try to win Gwen's heart. He tried to earn her respect, and he did it without fanfare, through small, quiet things. On a rainy Wednesday, Ava came into the shop after school, dragging her backpack, face tight with frustration. Grant was wiping down tables. She dropped into a chair and huffed. "My laptop crashed again. The teacher said my essay was late, 'cause I didn't submit it on time." Grant paused. "What kind of laptop do you use?" "The one Mama's friend gave me. It's like, from the dinosaur age." He didn't ask another question. The next morning, when Ava came in for her usual mini muffin, there was a brand new Chromebook sitting at the counter with a sticky note that read, "Keep writing. You've got something to say." "Gee," she screamed. Her mama gave Grant a long, cautious look, but she didn't tell him to take it back. 2 days later, Gwen's mother walked in after a routine doctor's appointment. There was an envelope waiting for her on the back shelf. Inside, 6 months of prescription refills already paid at her pharmacy. No signature. Just a simple receipt and the note, "You took care of her. Let someone take care of you." But the act that finally turned heads didn't come from Gwen. It came from the neighborhood. A local middle school had put out a call for sponsors to fund summer culinary classes for low-income youth. They needed $4,000 to keep the kitchen program alive. Gwen had already donated what she could, but they were still short. When the principal stopped by Big Love to ask if she knew anyone who could help, she apologized. "I've got mouths to feed and rent to pay. I wish I had more to give." By the following Monday, the full donation was wired in. No press, no photo op, just one line in the school's thank you email. Covered in full, "Anonymous donor from Big Love Kitchen." Gwen checked the account. It wasn't hers. She looked up, and through the glass window, she saw Grant outside cleaning the sidewalk with a push broom. She didn't say anything that day, but that night she left a hot plate by his locker. Jambalaya, still steaming. No note, but the gesture spoke louder than words. "I see you." Grant never asked for a second chance. He simply became a man who might deserve one. And every act, every mop, every donation, every gentle kindness became a new page in the story of a man learning how to serve instead of control. Not because he wanted Gwen's love back, but because he finally understood what love required. Some wounds don't scar. They stay open, raw, even when the bleeding stops. That's how Gwen felt every time she looked at Grant. Even after weeks of seeing him mop floors, refill the napkin holders, and scrub trays after closing, she never let her guard fall completely. She didn't trust Easy. Not anymore. Not after he weaponized her body and dignity for boardroom revenge. Not after he let the world believe she was some pawn in a petty family feud. So when he asked to stay, not just in the staff quarters, but in her life, Gwen didn't give him a yes. She gave him a boundary. You work. You don't ask for anything. And you don't touch what's not yours. Understood, Grant said softly, eyes lowered. It was the first time he'd sounded human instead of powerful. Weeks passed. He never flinched when customers ignored him or when Ava's friends whispered, "That's the guy who used to run Aldridge Holdings." He never once mentioned their past, never pressured her for a sit-down talk or brought up their kiss under the stars or the night she'd cooked gumbo by candlelight. He simply showed up, on time, every day. Chopped onions till his hands stung, cleaned grease traps, sorted deliveries, smiled at her mama and walked Ava to the corner on late days. He became part of her rhythm, without interrupting it. One night, after closing, Gwen sat on the bench outside the shop with a cup of ginger tea. The air was cool, filled with the sound of crickets and distant city hums. Grant exited the back door quietly and paused, spotting her. She didn't look up. He started to turn back, giving her space. But her voice stopped him. "Sit, if you're not too tired." He froze for a beat, then slowly walked over and took the far end of the bench. They sat in silence. Two people who had once shared a bed, now sharing the same air like strangers, trying to find common ground again. "Ava talks about you sometimes," Gwen finally said. "She's brilliant," Grant replied. "I don't think she realizes it yet. She's cautious." "Like me," he turned to her. "You have every right to be." She met his gaze. There was no flirtation in it, only honesty. Only time would tell if that was enough. That night, Gwen didn't sleep with confusion. She slept with clarity, not because she trusted him, but because he wasn't asking her to. He was just there, present, humble, human. And for the first time in a long while, Gwen allowed herself to hope. Not for romance, but for peace. And peace, she thought, might be a good place to start. The first time one of Gwen's regulars recognized Grant, they almost dropped their catfish sandwich. "Hold up, ain't that Grant Aldridge, the Wall Street poster boy? Man, what you doing in an apron?" Grant just smiled and kept wiping down tables. Gwen, standing at the counter, had her arms crossed, but inside something tugged at her. He didn't deny it. He didn't shrink. He owned it, quietly, calmly, and day by day he made himself smaller in a space that once would have felt beneath him. The kitchen became their shared ground. Grant wore a navy apron with "Big Love," bigger flavor printed across the chest. Ava had painted it with her handprints. He chopped onions with precision and without complaint. He messed up a few orders at first, mixed up jerk and Cajun spices, burned the cornbread once. Gwen didn't scold. She just raised an eyebrow and said, "That's coming out your non-existent paycheck." He chuckled, and it echoed in the air like music from another life. Little by little, a new rhythm formed. In the mornings, he brewed coffee before she arrived. By noon, they moved around each other like seasoned dance partners, passing pans, finishing sauces, sharing side glances that spoke volumes. In the evenings, he helped Ava with math homework, while Gwen tallied receipts. Some nights, Mama Dottie would shuffle out from her room, peek into the kitchen, and say softly, "The boy don't talk much, but he's learning how to listen." One Sunday afternoon, during cleanup, Grant slipped and landed flat on his back, holding a bowl of mashed yams. The bowl survived. His pride didn't. Gwen laughed for the first time in days. Not a soft chuckle, a full belly laugh. She knelt down beside him, yams smeared on his shirt, and said, "You good?" "Not the worst fall I've taken in this kitchen," he replied, grinning. Their eyes locked. There was a tenderness in that moment neither of them dared define yet. The old Grant, the man with sleek suits, tailored smiles and press interviews, was gone. This version, he was grounded, silent when needed, loyal with no audience watching. He didn't try to fix things. He simply showed up for them, over and over again. And for Gwen, who'd been disappointed too many times by men with promises, that meant more than apologies. It meant growth. By the end of the month, Grant knew how to roll dumplings, flip catfish, without breaking it, and could recite Gwen's hush-puppy recipe by heart. More importantly, he was learning how to serve, not as a punishment, but as a privilege. And Gwen? She was learning how to breathe next to him again without holding her heart hostage. Their first official date wasn't in a five-star hotel. It wasn't Paris. It wasn't steak tartare and caviar. It was the back porch of Gwen's house in Atlanta. String lights overhead, soft R&B playing from her Bluetooth speaker, 2 glasses of peach tea, and fried plantains on a chipped ceramic plate. Grant sat beside her in jeans and a white tee, barefoot, grounded. Gwen wore a sundress that danced with the evening breeze. Her curls were up in a bun, a single one falling near her cheek. He reached over and tucked it behind her ear without saying a word. "You know," she whispered, "you've come a long way from hiding behind your father's name." He turned to her slowly. "You always saw through that, didn't you?" Gwen smirked. From day one, their eyes locked. The weight of all their shared history hung in the air, but so did something new. Something soft, unforced, earned. He leaned in slowly, so slowly she could have pulled away if she wanted to. She didn't. Their lips met in the warm hush of a Georgia night, and time stalled. No fireworks, no music swelling, just the quiet thump of 2 healed hearts finding each other again. Later that night, as Ava slept soundly in her room and Mama Dottie hummed gospel in her sleep, Gwen stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching Grant fold the last of the towels in the laundry basket. No flash, no bravado, just a man doing simple things. She crossed the room, touched his wrist. He looked up. "I want tonight," she said softly. "Not because I'm lonely, but because I'm not afraid anymore." He followed her to bed, not as a conqueror, but as a man coming home. The room wasn't candlelit. The sheets weren't satin. But when he kissed her, it was patient. When he undressed her, it was respectful. When his fingers traced the fullness of her waist and hips, he didn't look away. He smiled. "Beautiful," he whispered. She rolled her eyes, blushing. "Stop. I mean it." Gwen let go of the walls she'd carried for years, not because she was weak, but because he'd earned the right to see her bare, not just in skin, but in soul. They made love slowly. Rhythm met reverence. Breath met heartbeat. There was hunger, yes, but it was steeped in tenderness. His touch wasn't rushed. Her response wasn't shy. It was a conversation of sighs, of warmth, of rediscovery. He memorized her scars with kisses. She traced the lines of stress around his eyes with her fingers. Their bodies moved like a prayer, quiet, honest, thankful. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, Gwen whispered into his chest, "I thought the next time I let someone in, it'd be someone new." Grant kissed her forehead and replied, "Maybe I just had to become someone new." Outside, the crickets chirped. Inside, healing had taken root. No more pretending, no more performances. Just 2 people learning to love with both eyes open. Gwen's mornings felt different now, not rushed, not heavy, just hopeful. She found herself humming while packing Ava's lunch, throwing in extra fruit snacks just because she knew her niece would share them. Mama Dottie noticed too, giving Gwen that knowing grin only Southern mothers could master. "You smiling in your sleep now," Mama Dottie teased one morning over biscuits and jam. Must be them porch kisses. Gwen blushed hard. Mama. But her heart danced. Grant, meanwhile, was shifting too, on a level deeper than anything a boardroom had ever demanded of him. He no longer started his day checking stock indexes or investor reports. Instead, he showed up at Gwen's small commercial kitchen before sunrise, helping organize spice racks or load produce into the fridge. The staff, mostly young women from the neighborhood, looked at him first with confusion, then quiet admiration. It was strange. He'd once ruled a marble floor empire. Now he was proud just to be the guy chopping onions beside his wife. One afternoon, as they prepped for a local food festival, Grant caught Gwen, standing in the walk-in freezer, staring at rows of prepped gumbo trays. She wasn't moving, just absorbing. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded slowly. "I used to dream about this, feeding hundreds, running my own team, being more than just the fat maid." Grant stepped in. "You were always more, Gwen. I just couldn't see past my own reflection." She turned, her eyes glossy, but this time, no tears fell. Only hope bloomed. That night, as they stood on the porch again, watching Ava play hopscotch, in the driveway, Gwen slipped her hand into Grant's without speaking. They didn't need words. Their silence had changed. It no longer carried bitterness. Now it cradled something beautiful. Peace, expectation, future. One evening, Gwen walked into the kitchen to find a stack of handwritten notes taped to the fridge, each one titled, "Reasons I'm Still Trying." She read them one by one. "You let me start over without punishment. You see me even when I don't deserve it. You make failure feel like a detour, not a death sentence. You taught me love doesn't have to come in a mansion." Gwen stood there for a long time, hand pressed over her heart, mouth trembling. She didn't say anything. She just walked over to Grant and hugged him from behind. He turned around slowly, held her face, and said the one thing he had never said during their entire first marriage. "I love you, Gwen. Not for what you've endured, but for who you are. All of it." The world didn't shift that night, but their world did. From survival to joy, from shame to softness, from pretending to praying for more nights like this, for fewer regrets, and for a chance to start something new, together. It started with gumbo. It always did. One night, while sharing leftovers on the porch, Gwen joked, "You know, if we delivered this to those Midtown tech offices, we'd be sold out in an hour." Grant blinked. "That's actually not a bad idea." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing in that familiar spark of ambition, not the cold corporate kind, but something new, humble, grounded, driven by love. "What if we did?" he asked. Gwen raised a brow. "Did what?" He smiled. "Built something together, from scratch, just like this gumbo." They called it Big Love Express. A food, delivery startup, hyper-local, personal, soulful, focused on Gwen's signature dishes, red beans and rice, smoked turkey collards, peach cobbler that could bring grown men to tears. But it wasn't just about food. It was about healing through hospitality. Grant invested what little he had left, not from a corporate account, but from selling his luxury watch collection. Gwen matched it with her catering savings. They rented a second kitchen space, built a sleek, no-frills app, recruited local teens to be delivery runners. Mama Dottie called it blessing redistribution. They handled everything as equals. Gwen ran the kitchen, training young women in food prep, sanitation, and soul food recipes passed down through generations. She made it a rule: no one who worked for her would be shamed for their size, background, or past. Grant handled logistics, delivery routes, tech support, marketing. He learned to code again. He even learned how to mop properly. One night, after a long shift, Gwen found him on his knees scrubbing the back pantry floor. "Your shirt says CEO," she teased. He looked up, sweat on his brow. "Exactly. That's why I'm down here." They launched the app on a Monday. By Wednesday, they'd sold out of everything. By Friday, a local journalist wrote a headline that made Gwen cry, the former maid feeding the city with love. The photo featured Grant in a sauce-stained apron, holding a tray of cornbread muffins, and Gwen, smiling with her arms folded, looking like the queen she always was. Months passed. Orders grew. Their hearts grew faster. They hired more teens from the neighborhood, added weekly give-back nights where meals were delivered free to elderly residents and shelters. Grant gave motivational talks at schools about second chances. Gwen ran Saturday workshops on cooking and confidence for young girls. Together, they weren't just building a business. They were building a legacy. One night, sitting on the porch, Gwen rested her head on Grant's shoulder and whispered, "I never thought love could feel safe." Grant kissed her hair. "That's because you'd only known love that made you prove yourself. But real love, it just stays." A soft wind passed through. Ava giggled inside. Mama Dottie hummed a gospel tune in the kitchen. And in that moment, Gwen knew. She had turned her shame into strength, her sorrow into sauce, and the man who once used her name now wore it with pride. Gwen had been tired for days, bone-deep exhaustion she couldn't explain. At first, she blamed the late-night catering rushes, or maybe even stress. But when she paused in front of a bakery window one afternoon, staring at a tray of cinnamon rolls and crying, she knew something was different. The pregnancy test only confirmed what her heart had already guessed. She stood in the bathroom staring at the 2 pink lines for what felt like forever. Her fingers trembled, not out of fear, but from the shock of realizing she was about to experience motherhood again, but this time with love. Grant was prepping lunch when she walked in, hands still floury, apron askew. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, holding out the test. He froze. Utter stillness, and then his lips parted, eyes shimmering. We're having a baby." She nodded. "Yeah, we are." He dropped the whisk, wrapped his arms around her, and buried his face in her shoulder. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "You don't have to," she replied. "Just show up." And he did. At every appointment, every craving, every late-night belly rub when Gwen couldn't sleep. He studied birthing classes like he was preparing for a CEO board exam. Ava decorated the nursery with purple and gold stars. Mama Dottie said the baby would come with fire and favor. Gwen's belly grew with life. Their love grew with purpose, and the weight of their past was slowly being replaced with something sacred: hope. It was a stormy Thursday night when Gwen's water broke. The thunder cracked loud enough to rattle windows, but Gwen barely noticed. Her back arched, breath short, contractions slicing through her with a power she couldn't explain. Grant was a whirlwind, grabbing the bag, calling the midwife, making sure Ava was safe with Dottie. At the birthing center, Gwen's screams echoed through the walls, but she stayed strong, grounded in faith, grit, and black womanhood. She pushed through the fire, her fists gripping Grant's hands so tight he lost feeling in his fingers. But he didn't flinch. He kissed her forehead between contractions and whispered prayers into her ear. "You're doing amazing. She's almost here. Keep going, baby." Gwen's final push came with a roar, and then a cry, a high-pitched, trembling cry that cut through the room like light splitting the clouds. A baby girl. The nurse placed her on Gwen's chest, tiny, brown-skinned, a swirl of curls already forming on her head. Her eyes squinted shut, fists clenched like she was ready to fight the world if it hurt her mama. Gwen sobbed. Grant wept beside her. They named her Hope Elise Aldridge, a name rooted in everything they'd lost and everything they'd chosen to build again. "I love you," Grant whispered into Gwen's damp curls, kissing her over and over. "I love you more," she whispered back, holding their daughter close. And just like that, their second chance had a heartbeat. No boardroom had ever made Grant Aldridge sweat like diaper duty. He fumbled the wipes, used too much powder, sang lullabies out of tune. But every time he picked up Hope Elise, something inside him softened, melted even. The man who once treated love like a weakness was now pouring himself into late-night bottle feedings and stroller assembly instructions. Gwen watched him with quiet awe. "This you?" she teased one night, watching him cradle hope on his chest in the rocking chair. He smiled without looking up. "This is the real me, the one I was too afraid to become." Fatherhood rewired him. He no longer chased quarterly reports or Wall Street validation. He chased giggles, bath time splashes, tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. He started a fathers group for black and biracial dads in the neighborhood, safe spaces to cry, learn and show up. He even apologized to Mama Dottie, face to face, telling her, "You were right about everything." When Ava fell off her bike and scraped her knee, Grant ran faster than Gwen did. When Hope cried, he sang a ridiculous lullaby Gwen made up in the hospital. He became the kind of man Gwen no longer had to heal, just build with. He was still learning, still healing. But now, he did it out loud, with pride, not just for Gwen, but for Ava, for Hope, for himself. They bought a farmhouse just outside Savannah, peach-colored bricks, wraparound, porch, wind chimes that played gospel chords in the breeze. Gwen wanted land, space, a garden. Grant wanted simplicity, chickens, silence, peace. Ava got her own room with a galaxy ceiling, a treehouse out back, and a baby sister she adored. Life was loud but rooted. Mornings smelled like cinnamon. Evenings ended with porch talks and fireflies. Big Love Kitchen expanded into 2 new locations, one near Atlanta and another in Charleston. Gwen became a household name, not because she catered celebrity weddings, but because she served food with soul and dignity. They employed single mothers, formerly incarcerated women, and foster youth. Their business model didn't just feed mouths, it built lives. Grant's name still carried weight, but he let Gwen take the spotlight. "She was the one who made this happen," he'd say during interviews, holding Hope Elise while Gwen spoke. People stopped staring at Gwen's body. They started listening to her words, following her recipes, admiring her leadership, and, finally, respecting her presence. She stood at the podium, lights blinding, applause echoing in waves. The Women's Wellness Conference in downtown Chicago had never seen anyone like Gwen Aldridge. She wasn't a size 2. She wasn't polished with plastic sheen, but she was powerful, radiant, honest. She wore a yellow wrap dress and didn't apologize for the curve of her hips or the way her arms moved when she talked. "My name is Gwen," she began, voice clear. "And for years, I let society tell me that my body made me less." The audience leaned in. "But my body has carried me through grief, survival, motherhood, and love. My body is not a burden. It is a blessing." She paused, looked down at her notes, then folded them away. "I married a man who once used me as a statement, and I walked away with my self-worth intact, because dignity isn't about size. It's about presence, purpose, power." The room erupted in standing ovation. Grant watched from the side of the stage, Hope Elise in his lap, and tears in his eyes. Backstage, Gwen hugged him tight. "You didn't just change," she whispered. "You gave me space to rise." "No," he said, kissing her. "You always had it. I just stopped standing in the way." And with that, the maid once mocked for her weight had become the woman everyone stood to honor. I used to think love meant shrinking myself to fit into someone else's world. But sometimes, love is what teaches you to expand. There was a time I was just the help in his hallway. No name, no value, no future. He married me to mock their pride, but he didn't expect me to carry mine with so much grace. I left without begging. I didn't need to make a scene. My dignity was my goodbye. I didn't rebuild for revenge. I rebuilt for peace, for my daughters, for my voice. And somehow, the man I once feared became the man I could lean on. We don't always get to choose how stories start, but we always get to choose how they end. This is my ending, and my beginning. You don't need to look a certain way to be worthy of love. You don't need to be skinny to be respected. You don't need a title to demand dignity. People like to talk about fairy tale endings. But mine came after betrayal, after pain, after walking away with nothing but my name. Gwen speaking at a body-positive event. My body has carried babies, carried grief, carried a business. It is not something to be fixed. It is something to be honored. Redemption is real. But it takes time and truth. Truth will always reveal who loves you and who just wants to use you. I didn't fall in love with the CEO. I fell in love with the man who was willing to start over from scratch just to be worthy of my heart. Your story doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. You're allowed to demand more. You're allowed to choose peace over pity. You're allowed to be loud in your skin, take up space and live out loud. I used to think my legacy was survival, but now it's Ava and hope. Ava taught me to keep going, even when I didn't know how. She gave me a reason to believe again. Ava presenting her business pitch at a school competition. She saw the whole storm, but never stopped dancing in the rain. And hope? She was born from second chances, from quiet porch nights, from forgiveness. She's proof that love can grow in the places you once gave up on. The whole family planting tomatoes in their backyard. These girls won't inherit silence, they'll inherit stories, courage, freedom. We didn't just survive, we built something. I know there's someone out there watching this right now, someone who thinks they're too broken, too big, too late. But hear me when I say, you are enough. You don't have to lose weight to gain love. You don't have to be silent to be safe. You don't have to earn dignity. It's yours by birthright. If you believe every woman deserves dignity, hit that like button. Share this story. Let someone else remember they matter. And if you're standing at the edge of your own story, don't let shame be the author. Write your next chapter in truth, in power, in love. They used to say, he married her to shame his family. Maybe he did. But love made us start over. And in the end, that's all that matters. He married me to shame his parents. But love made us start over.